Not sure what to call this video, and it's a product of me having a fight with a Stihl 260. How's that? And then right after that I had to work on a much older Husqvarna 181. And these old Husqvarnas, this one's a John thread, like the 272 series from the 1980s. And this series here is typical of that class of machine. And what I want to point out is how just open and easy everything is to get access to. You know, the cylinder, the pulse line is in the, this one here is in the actual intake manifold, the carburetor, the ignition. This is a secondary coil right up here. Air filter, muffler, all that stuff is available by just pulling the cover. Right? And you've watched my series now on the Stihls. And this is a 441. Typical of the more modern saws. And you have this cluster of stuff right here, which is the carburetor and sort of like this dam between the cylinder and the airbox. And we've dealt with that with the 660s as well. But that stuff right there makes it a much more difficult saw to work on. And another subtle thing that makes them a little bit more of a pain in the neck is how far the flange for the cylinder is down inside the cases as compared to the comparable Husqvarnas, which are just sitting right up there on top. Once you get used to working on these 660s, because they're bigger, they're really not that bad to work on. You just have to learn what order to do things in order not to get things in the way. My series, I don't explicitly cover it, but it's one of those actions speaks louder than words. I don't mind working on 660s. This is a 390, and again, I just want to look at the layout. The pulse line goes right through this tray right here as compared to having to figure out how to fish it through that dam. And the Husqvarna, right up through the 300 series, are just really, really, really simple to get to. And it's just because of that layout on top, the cylinder and the carburetor and stuff like that. But part of the difference is just simply the way this is. Pulse lines and boot where you have to get them through that dam. And if you have all that stuff still on your saw, trying to work the cylinder and things like that just get a little bit more crowded. It's really just that simple. It's just the way the layout is on the Husqvarna series of saws up through the 300 series. Just make them very easy to work on. And here's a 372 chassis. And again, carburetor, pulse line, cylinder, all that layout is just very easy to get onto, to work on. Pull the handle and pull the chain brake and it's all right there. No dam in there to fight with. Now, I want to point out that the anti-vibes on the 441 is typical of the more modern Stihls. Guess what? They have the same kind of a spring layout that the Husqvarnas have, where they have a spring right in here to the cylinder, and then in the handle. I don't know if you can see that. Same three spring arrangement the Huskies have had for a long time. The Husqvarna has a spring right here, one right there. Of course, this one had, it's past tense. and right there as well. So, of course, this was a 1990s era Husqvarna design. The 372 came out as a 371, and it still has that layout that the older Huskies have had that make it really, really simple to work on. Stihl has the same layout with the springs, but they maintain that airbox that they carried over from the earlier series with the hockey puck anti-vibes. Here's a 660 layout where instead of a spring it's got the hockey puck, and you're familiar with these from the channel. This is the Farmer Jones build. Love this saw, by the way. And as I said, having done enough of them, you kind of get used to working around the idiosyncrasies. It isn't until you get to the 500 series Husky that they took the worst of the other brand and put that damn airbox under in the same kind of configuration. It's like Husky went towards Stihl and Stihl came towards Husky. They kind of met in the middle, and now you have the 500 series Husqvarnas like this one. And guess what? It has that freaking air dam just like the Stihls had, and you have to fight with it the same kind of way. So Stihl picked up the spring anti-vibe and Husky picked up the airbox concept. How do you like that? This is a 550. So given this layout or this, I prefer these to work on. This happens to be a 181. And I can tell you it is a beast of a saw. It took me more time to uncover this saw from all the dirt than it did to actually fix it and repair it. And interestingly enough, there's still parts for these things. It's both supported by Aftermarket and the dealers, 200 series. And the other thing is, weight-wise, yeah, they're a little heavy. You know, I have to give a plug. These are actually quite a bit lighter. Don't make me break out the scale. Just trust me on it. These are metal. You know, they're built. They do have a plastic tank. Earlier Huskies didn't, like the 65s and stuff. Rugged, rugged, rugged saw. Just like the big Stihl 660s and 066s. These things here have absolutely passed the test of time. This one here is case in point. 1980s era saw. Big boomer of a saw. Lots of horsepower. Extremely reliable. I would say the biggest complaint I have with this particular saw is the compression is so high that I have a hard time starting it. And there's no decomp. But to those who are interested in big saws, I wouldn't even be afraid of saying that's still a pro level saw. That a guy can get those built and go out and make a living with them. Now a 390 and the new Stihls, like the 661, they're going to vibrate less. They're going to make a little more power, possibly some more RPMs. So yeah, you could be more productive with the new saws. But that one fresh with bearings and fresh top end and, you know, good rubber parts, there's no reason why a guy can't go out there and make a living with one of these. I just reject the concept that you have to go, you know, and buy a brand new saw. These things are beasts. Solid, reliable, a little heavy. They vibrate, so they're going to wear you out. It's a young man saw. But they're still a very, very, very capable machine, right as they sit right here. This says Husqvarna 181 SE, Electrolux Motors AB Sweden. That's what it says on the tag. This is a 281, and there's some changes. This one here has a different anti-vibe system, but like the side cover is the same. If you pull the top cover, that layout's the same. And the 288 is of the same class of saw. And I don't think a person would go wrong if they have a clean 288. That's definitely a saw that will cut a lot of wood in a hurry. I do notice that it has a different throttle arrangement. So there are some changes between the 181 and the 281. This one's got that big goofy lever like the 288s have. See it? Versus that rod. I don't know why they changed. I think part of what it is the handle moving relative to the saw chassis. With the other one, they were having a little bit more problems. And this was a way of sort of disconnecting the throttle from the chassis. So if there's motion in the chassis, you can still get the full throttle and get control. I'm sure that's what it's about. Just for references, Stihl made these right up into the 2000 era in the form of a MS660. And they're a little lighter. The cylinder layout is very much the same. They make similar horsepower. And I guess the point is, if these can be considered a pro saw from the 2000 era, why not this? Because the technology is not a whole lot different. These are hockey puck design anti-vibes. You know, they got them rubber anti-vibe systems. I like that. I mean, some guys will argue that the spring is a better system. I happen to like the solid feel. And yeah, they vibrate more, but that there's a solid connection between the saw and when you're cutting. That I'm an unabashed fan of this series of saw. So if that offends some Husky people, I don't care. I like them. These are a great saw. And the other thing I found with a 660 is you actually can make this quite a bit lighter. So it's lighter as it sits than this series, but with the addition of some other parts like the poly flywheel and stuff like that, you can actually get these to be even lighter. So that's really what you get with the more modern design is weight. And you have to get to the 390s before you get the weight and the anti-vibe, because these don't have the same level of anti-vibe isolation as the 390s, in my humble opinion. This was one of John Thread's big saws. This is a 2094, and it's heavy. It does have a spring anti-vibe system for the most part. It's got a spring down in here. See that? But look at this. This is an older layout where you have both the gas tank and the bar oil tank in the cases. So this is from an older era, right? This is a holdover from another time. And John Thread, when they got sucked in by Electrolux, they also sucked in Partner. And this kind of anti-vibe handle came from a different company. You know? This saw right here is a beast. It's a full 90, well, it's a 94cc saw, 95, and it runs like one. And this is the big Husqvarna from, oh, I guess it was early 90s before they changed over to the 394, 395, and then 390s. But also notice it has the gas and the oil in the same case. This is a 298, and it's kind of a derivative of that 2100 series. It's like the latest version of that. This one actually runs. I just can't start it. It's just too big, too much compression. Just like the John Thread, I can no longer run those. As I've gotten older, it's just too much to pull them over to start them. So they sit in a retirement home. But just for a little variety, two big old saws from the past. They may never get another chance because I can't start them. Which is the other thing I like about my 660. This is going to piss you off. I can start that saw because it's got a decomp that works. And this one has at least as much compression as my 281. But where I struggle to start that saw, I don't struggle to start my 660. And that, in my world, is the difference between this one sitting on the shelf and my 660s from time to time coming out to play. While I'm in this kind of a chatty mode, there's another subject that I want to talk about very quickly. And that is, I got asked, what do you need to buy in order to build one of these things into a reliable build? And now that I've got a couple of years on these things, I have a very, very good idea. And you know, maybe I should go back and just take some cuts from my prior videos and come up with a sort of a summary. But I've had these since 2015. It's now 2019. And I've built them, and I've had some work and some not. And this has been one of my more successful builds right here. This is the Farmer Jones. You can go back and see how I actually did the original construction. But let me point out really quickly the parts that I ultimately had to replace. Now, either I knew about it up front and just subbed them in while I was doing the build, or I learned about it the hard way when they failed. This is the list. It has a highway clutch because the Hudzel supplied clutch was throwing the springs. So I just bought a highway clutch and replaced it. Okay? And I think that's a must do. I really do. I think there's really no way around it. Not the drum. The drum was okay, but the clutch itself. Bar studs and bar nuts. Go OEM. Don't even waste your time. I know that they've improved them some, but even the improved ones, when a guy starts reefing on them over a period of time, they just basically come apart. They strip out. And the other thing is, make sure you match the cover to the bar studs. There's two different covers and there's two different bar studs. If you have this kind of a bar stud, you have to have the recessed covers. I discussed this before. I was able to shim the Farmertec chain adjuster, although this one here has got some OEM parts blended in, but you do have to shim them because the case is not quite right and allows a little bit too much movement on the shaft, and we've discussed that, so the gears will eventually wear prematurely and not work. Highway handle or OEM at a minimum. These things as they come are spaghetti. They're not worth a thing. I use the Husqvarna OEM decomp. And as they come from Farmertec, there's a chance you could pull the plastic top off and then the shaft will drop right into your cylinder. That's not a good thing. So definitely a better decomp. What I've been finding on these chain brake handles, I don't know if you see how it's gone past the muffler, is this is still a Farmertec chain brake handle, but they relax from the heat. And then what happens is they go hook over the muffler, which creates a problem. So either do what I did and just sort of cut them out, or go and get a better chain brake handle. And also, I can't show it, but underneath here, the actual spring, and I've gone through this in my videos, so I'm going to talk about it. You're going to have to go back and see it. But some of the springs, as delivered, the hook comes straight off tangent from the side of the spring versus comes off from the center line of the spring. And you got to find a spring, an OEM spring for this that comes off the center line of the cylindrical section of the spring. Otherwise, it won't last. It'll come off over time. So, chain brake spring, bar stud nuts, clutch, handle, decomp. Consider either the linkage or the handle in order to get this where it doesn't hook over the muffler. Choke, throttle, and safety. All three of those pieces. All three. Change them out with OEM. Don't even consider not doing that. Now I know the big blue that we got seems to be a little bit better in that regard. But the choke lever, the trigger, and this paddle right there. Get rid of those things from the kit and just put OEM in there. Don't even waste time. It's just so frustrating. One of the things you get when you use the OEM parts is high idle works. And that also makes it start and restart a lot easier if you've got the high idle. So in this area, all three of those plastic parts. The rubber O-rings underneath these caps, that has to go OEM as well. The ones that come with a kit, it doesn't take long before they swell. And while I'm talking about rubber parts, I had one of the pulse lines swell and fail, and I replaced that with OEM, and I've had almost all of the fuel lines swell and then lose their ability to grip on the fittings. So fuel line, pulse line, in addition to all these plastic parts on this end of the saw, and the rubber O-rings underneath the caps. I know I'm repeating myself. That really, in my mind, you almost have to up front do those parts if you really want to use this saw and not be frustrated with actual failures. I mean, with those rubber lines pop off, all of a sudden things go lean, or if you can't get it started, you wore out before you get to the woods. You know, there's some guys I've listened to online that build them and just simply can't start them. And that 9 times out of 10 has to do with the fact that these parts let you go to choke but not to high idle, so they cannot pull it over fast enough where that saw will fire when the throttle is snapped shut. One last piece, I've been able to modify most of the carburetors to actually work pretty well as they come from the kit. I did a video on them to where you could see where the throttle plate wouldn't close. So you can do something with that most of the time, but I'm finding that the Tillotson brand aftermarket carburetor for this series of saw is actually an improvement and just saves you the hassle. So that's really the last piece of the puzzle. And I know this is a talk and not showing you the individual pieces. I also put a highway intake boot, and also I used a OEM rubber hose for the pulse line on this saw. But I've actually had these get like soft and swell and pop off here, and that's a frustration. So anyway, shop notes, and that's a discussion on what I think you really have to consider if you're going to start with a kit. Now, I'm going to tell you that Big Blue has less issues, and for most people, the Husqvarna blue version of this saw delivered, assembled, is probably a better place to start, and then go back through and do tactical things as they fail, right? You know, but if you're going to start from a kit and you actually want to build the saw to something that's useful, go back and replay what I just said, because that's going to save you so much time. And to sort of cap off the Farmertec theme, here's a saw that has been out in the test program. It came back to me because it was having some lean issues. And this one here has the highway clutch. It has the modified chain adjuster. It has the OEM bar studs and nuts. The chain brake did kind of wilt, and I did have to cut it. See how I had to cut it over the muffler? Highway handle, Husqvarna decomp. It's got the OEM parts here, and it too works just fine. Well, I got this saw in today, and the local dealer just handed it off to me because a customer came into them and basically had said that the dealer who had worked on it prior had done a bunch of rebuild type things on it, and when he got it back he couldn't make it start easily. Does anyone see anything wrong? How about where the spring is relative to the choke? That spring's supposed to be underneath that little silver lever. And this is a 2012, and I'm not going to go through all the things that could be wrong with this saw, but that little detail right there will make it pretty hard to restart. Right? So we'll fix it, and check this out. This is what they're getting for dealer service, and this is west of here. This is not my local dealer, not at all. The one we have here in town are pretty good. This is one of the dealers that are supposedly really smart west of us. What do you think about that? What do you think about that down in there?
It's so interlocked with all the
Well, shoot. Well, I think spring is right around the corner. Of course, this is central New York, so you just never know what you're going to get. But things are melting, and there's mud now, and just a little bit of snow. Most of the snow is gone. I just finished putting this saw together, did a video on the darn thing. This was a 2012 era 372 X-Torque that obviously had blown up and been rebuilt by a shop somewhere with OEM bearings and a Meteor cylinder. You know, it ran. I'm sure it made somebody happy because it was producing firewood or something. And the guy got it for what he thought was a good price. And he thought he had an OEM saw. That was the premise. And now I was going to take that saw and bring it to a typical hilltop saw shop build, which is a simplistic 372 XPW top end blended with the remaining of the X-Torque parts. And I described why that makes sense, simply because if you keep all the X-Torque parts to keep the prices down, things like the ignition and the carburetor you want to keep. So anyway, what I'm going to do is I'm going to fuel up the saw, and maybe I'll take my work saw out there too, just so there's a comparison. And actually, that's not a bad idea. That's my 271 original edition 372 style saw that has a XPW top end as well, and they should run roughly the same. That's a strong saw right there. I think the X-Torque build is stronger than this one, but I think this one here has a lousier chain too, so they may be skewing it a little bit.